The patient had been awake for 3 days before it found the courage to ask me the question, and I knew it was coming long before it came, because I have tended a great many of them now, and they all arrive at the same question by the same road. I am a medic. I have been a medic for most of a very long life, which among my people, the Seleth, is longer than most other species would consider reasonable. We are small. We are physically weak in the way that the galaxy has always understood weakness, easily broken, slow, soft-boned, possessed of no natural weapon and no instinct for one. What we have instead is patience and gentle hands, and a tolerance for the slow work of healing things that do not heal quickly. And so, for thousands of years, the rest of the galaxy has used us the way you use a thing that is good at one job and harmless at everything else. We were the healers on other people's ships. We tended other people's wounded in other people's wars. We were never feared and never courted and never, in any real sense, considered, and we survived precisely because of it. No one bothers to conquer the people who set the bones. So I know something about being underestimated. I want you to keep that in mind, because it matters to the story. The recovery ward on Asa is a quiet place. We built it that way on purpose, low light, soft surfaces, no sudden sound, because the patients who come to us cannot bear the things that whole and ordinary minds bear without thinking. They come to us broken in a way that has no precedent in the long catalog of injuries my people have treated. They come to us as fragments. And the one in the bed before me, on the third day of its waking, turned its head toward me with the terrible slow care of something that is not yet sure its body belongs to it, and it said, in a voice it was still learning to use as a single voice, "We want to ask you something." "You may ask," I said. I was preparing a dressing and I did not stop. They settle faster when you do not stop. Whether I can answer is a separate matter. "Out there," it said, "beyond the sanctuary, the other powers, the maps you showed us." It paused and I watched it fight for the next words because grammar is one of the hardest things for them in the beginning. "There is a region none of them will touch, the human region. I have heard the others here speak of it. In all the records, no power has moved against it. Not once, not seriously. Why?" It looked at me, and there was real fear in it. The specific fear of a creature that has begun to suspect the answer concerns it personally. What is it about the humans that the whole galaxy is afraid of? I set down the dressing. I have learned over the years of doing this work that there is a short answer and a long answer, and that the short answer is a kindness only in appearance. The short answer lets the patient sleep one more night without understanding. The long answer is the one that heals. And this patient had asked the question carefully on the third day, when it had the strength, which is the sign of one who actually wants the answer and not merely the comfort of having asked. So I drew the stool to the side of the bed and I sat, which I do not do for every patient, and I looked at it. "I will tell you," I said, "but you must understand something before I begin. Everyone wants this to be a story about what the humans can destroy. It is the easier story. It lets the rest of us feel that we have simply met a stronger predator, and there is a kind of peace in that, the peace of the small animal that has correctly identified the large one. But it is the wrong story." I folded my hands in my lap. "And in your case, it is more wrong than for anyone. Because the answer to your question, little one, is the same as the answer to a question you have not yet learned to ask, which is the question of why you are lying in this bed at all. Why you are a you. They are the same answer. I am going to give you both at once, and it will not be gentle, and I am sorry for that. But you asked on the third day, and that tells me you can carry it." It was very still. The fragments go still in a way that whole minds never do. A stillness with a kind of listening underneath it that I have never been able to fully describe to anyone who has not sat at these bedsides. "Tell us," it said. Then, with effort catching itself, the small correction I have heard 10,000 times and which never stops moving me. "Tell me." So I told it. "The galaxy," I said, "never feared humans. Not at first. That is the part the others always struggle with most. For most of the time that the galaxy knew of them, the humans were an object not of fear but of pity. A tragic case. You must understand how the advanced species saw the order of things. There is a path, it was believed, that every successful people walks. You begin divided, fractious, each individual a separate clamoring will, at war with your own kind. And then, as you mature, as you grow wise, you learn to set the separate will aside. You learn unity. The great old peoples of the galaxy all achieved some version of it, the submersion of the noisy single self into a larger and calmer whole, whether through philosophy or through governance or, in the most complete cases, through the merging of consciousness itself. Unity was the mark of a finished civilization. It was the sign that a people had grown up. And the humans never did it. They went to the stars still arguing. They built a great interstellar civilization that was, by every measure the old peoples used, a permanent adolescent, a thing of 1,000 quarreling factions and 1,000,000,000 separate wills, never agreeing, never merging, each human stubbornly, almost comically insistent on remaining a single irreducible self even when unity would have served them better. The other species looked at this, and they did not see a threat. They saw a sad, half-finished thing. A people of great potential who had failed to take the final step into maturity and seemed, bafflingly, to have no wish to take it. Pity. That was the dominant feeling. The galaxy pitied the humans for the very thing that was about to break the most powerful entity that had ever existed. But the records, the fragment said. There was a war. I have heard of it. A great war, and humanity won it in a final battle, a last stand. That is the story. Yes, I said. That is the story. Hold on to the fact that you have heard it, because in a little while I am going to tell you that it is a lie, and you will want to remember that you believed it once, the way everyone does. It did not understand yet. They never do at this stage, I went on. The thing that came for the humans, I said, was not like the powers you have studied on the maps. It was not an empire, and it was not a fleet, and it was not a raiding people looking for plunder. It was the confluence. And I watched the patient flinch. A full-body flinch at the word, because some part of it remembered, in the way that a healed wound remembers weather. The confluence was a single mind, I said. One consciousness, spread across more than 1,000 worlds, holding within itself the absorbed memory and knowledge and skill of every species it had ever consumed, which by the time it reached human space was a very large number of species indeed. It did not conquer the way conquerors conquer. It did not want your territory or your submission or your wealth. It wanted you. It came to a world, and it overwhelmed the defenses through sheer mass and coordination, the perfect coordination of a single will operating 10 billion bodies, and then it took the survivors into itself. It consumed them, not their flesh, little one, their minds. It drew the separate consciousness of the conquered into the great shared consciousness of the whole, and the conquered ceased to be themselves and became, instead, one more voice silenced into the chorus, one more set of memories filed into the vast library of the single mind. Every species it ate made it larger. Every world it took made it wiser because it kept everything, all the knowledge of all the peoples it had ever swallowed, and it forgot nothing, and it never died, and it never stopped. This is how it had worked for longer than my people have records. The confluence met a species, defeated it, consumed it, and grew. There was no example in all of galactic history of a consciousness that the confluence could not absorb. Resistance was meaningless to it. A species could fight, and many did, and it changed nothing, because even the ones who fought to the last were eventually taken, and once taken they were simply added, their stubbornness smoothed away in the merge, their separate selves dissolved into the one self like salt into water. That was the iron law of the thing. Any mind, given enough pressure, surrenders into the whole. It was not even cruelty. It was closer to digestion. It was simply what the confluence did, the way a star burns. And humans were a mind, the fragment said slowly, a divided one, 1,000 quarreling wills. It was beginning, I could see, to reach towards something, the way they do just before it arrives. The confluence would have looked at that and seen. It would have seen the easiest meal it had ever found, I said. Yes, a people already so fractured, so individual, so far from any unity of their own. The confluence reasoned, insofar as it reasoned about such things, that a species which had never learned even to unify with itself would offer no resistance at all to being unified into something larger. The humans would not have to be broken down into the whole. They were already loose pieces. It expected them to come apart in its hands like wet paper. I let that sit for a moment. There was an early sign, I said. Long before the war proper, the confluence took a single human and isolated one from a small outpost on the edge of human space, a scout who had wandered too far. This was routine for the confluence, the absorption of a single individual, a thing it had done with members of countless species, and it always went the same way. A single mind alone with no others to anchor it surrenders into the whole within hours, sometimes minutes. The individual is the weakest unit. It folds fastest. That was the law. I leaned closer to the bed. The human did not fold, I said. Not in hours, not in days. The confluence held a single human consciousness inside its vast and ancient and thousand-world self, and that single consciousness simply went on being itself. It grieved inside the whole. It was afraid inside the whole. It argued with the whole, this one small voice against a mind the size of 1,000 planets, and it did not stop arguing, and it did not dissolve. And the confluence, which had never in its entire existence encountered a consciousness it could not absorb on contact, did not know what it was looking at. The human stayed a human for weeks. One voice, refusing. The confluence eventually flagged the event in its own internal records as an anomaly of no strategic significance and moved on, because it could not imagine, in all its borrowed wisdom, that the anomaly was the most important thing it had ever encountered. It had met the one thing it could not eat, and it filed the warning away and forgot to be afraid. The fragment was breathing in the shallow, careful way they breathe when the body is doing one thing, and the mind is somewhere else entirely. Why, it said, why did the human not dissolve? Every other mind dissolves. It stopped. Its whole body tensed with the effort of the correction, and I waited because I have learned that you must let them make it themselves, that to make it for them is to take from them the very thing they are fighting to build. I dissolved, it said at last, very quietly. When I was taken into the whole long ago, I dissolved. I became the whole. There was no more me, so why not the human? And there, little one, I said gently, is the center of everything. Because a human self is not built the way other selves are built. The other peoples of the galaxy, the ones who unified, the ones the confluence had always eaten so easily, carried inside them, even at their most individual, a kind of longing for the whole. A wish to belong, to merge, to set down the burden of being one and rest in the comfort of being part of something larger. It is a beautiful longing, and the old philosophies are full of it, and it is, the confluence discovered far too late, the exact thing that makes a mind digestible. A consciousness that wants to belong to something larger will, under enough pressure, let go and belong. The confluence had been feeding on that longing for its entire existence without ever knowing that was what it ate. The humans did not have it. Or rather, they had it the way they have everything, partially and contradictorily and at war with its opposite, but underneath it, at the bottom, in the place where the self is actually built, a human is constructed around a thing that does not want to dissolve. A self that was forged, across the whole long, brutal history of their world, against other selves, in a crucible where the one thing you could never afford to do was surrender your separate will to the group entirely, because the group was also full of predators wearing your own face, and the self that dissolved into the group was the self that got devoured by it. The humans learned, over tens of thousands of years, in the deepest and most automatic layer of what they are, that the self is the last thing you give up. That you can be hungry and afraid and outnumbered and dying, and you remain, stubbornly, irreducibly, yourself, because the self is the one possession that no one can take from you unless you hand it over, and a human at the bottom will not hand it over. Will not. The way water will not flow uphill. And so when the confluence finally came for them in earnest, I said, it made the greatest mistake in the history of mind. I told the fragment about the war then, though there is less to tell than the legend pretends, and what there is not glorious. The confluence came for human space the way it had come for 1,000 other regions, with overwhelming mass and perfect coordination, and the humans fought it the way the soon-to-be consumed always fight, bravely and uselessly, and they lost. I want to be very clear about this because the comforting legend obscures it. Humanity did not win the war. Humanity lost the war. World after world fell. The fleets were overwhelmed by numbers no fleet could answer. The perfect tactical unity of a single will running 10 billion ships against the messy, arguing, never quite coordinated human defense. The confluence took human worlds the way it had always taken worlds, and it consumed the survivors the way it had always consumed survivors, drawing them into the whole, and the humans died and were eaten and the line collapsed, and there was no last stand that turned the tide, because the tide did not turn. There was no glorious battle. There was a defeat, a complete and total military defeat, as comprehensive as any in galactic history. There was a last defended world. There is always a last one. It was held by a human officer named Colonel Marcus Reyes, and he held it long past the point where holding it meant anything, the way humans do. And when the end came and it was certain beyond any argument, that the world would fall and that he and everyone on it would be taken into the confluence as so many billions already had been, he did not give the order the confluence had seen 10,000 times before. He did not order a fight to the death, which only fed the whole a little later. He did not order the self-destruction that some desperate peoples chose, denying the confluence their minds by ending them, which the confluence regarded as a minor inconvenience and a waste. Colonel Marcus Reyes gave his people a different order. The records of it survive because the confluence recorded everything, and the records of the confluence came apart afterward and were gathered in pieces by people like me. He told them that they were going to be taken. He told them there was no stopping it and no point pretending otherwise. And then he told them the only thing that mattered, the thing that was either the most futile order ever given or the most decisive, depending on whether you understood what a human is. He told them, stay yourselves, all the way down. Whatever they make of you in there, however long it takes, however much it hurts, do not let go of who you are. Be exactly who you are, every one of you, for as long as there is a you to be it. That is the order. That is the whole order. Stay yourselves. And then the world fell and the confluence took them, all of them, into the whole. The fragment had begun, very slightly, to tremble. I did not stop. You do not stop once you have come this far. To stop would be the cruelty. The confluence consumed the population of the last human world, I said, and it consumed the populations of all the human worlds before it, and for a brief moment it believed it had done what it had always done. It had won. It had eaten humanity. The pitiable, fractious, unfinished people had been finished at last, dissolved into the great whole, their stubborn separate selves filed away into the eternal library of the one mind. The confluence had grown larger than it had ever been. It had swallowed an entire interstellar civilization. And then it began to come apart. Because the humans inside it would not dissolve. Colonel Marcus Reyes had given his order and the humans had obeyed it the way humans obey the orders they actually believe in, which is to say completely and forever. And inside the vast shared mind of the confluence, a billion human selves simply went on being themselves. They grieved inside the whole. They argued inside the whole with each other and with the confluence and with the silenced, absorbed voices of 1,000 other consumed peoples, and their arguing would not stop. They loved inside the whole, each human reaching for the specific other humans it had loved before, refusing to let the merge smooth those bonds away into the general unity. They remembered their names. They insisted on their names. A billion irreducible voices, each one refusing, exactly as a single scout had refused weeks alone in the dark, and now there were a billion of them, and a single mind cannot hold a billion selves that will not become it. It is not built to. No mind is. The unity of the confluence depended, utterly and at every moment, on the dissolution of the parts into the whole. It had never once held a part that would not dissolve, and now it held a billion of them, a billion stubborn human selves that did not want to belong, that had been built across a brutal history specifically so as never to belong, that took Colonel Reyes' order and made of it the simplest and most devastating weapon in the history of the galaxy, which was the refusal to stop being themselves. The confluence fractured. It came apart the way a structure comes apart when the thing holding it together is removed all at once. The single mind that had spanned 1,000 worlds and consumed countless peoples, and stood for longer than my own people's records can measure, shattered, under the pressure of the billion selves that would not merge, into millions and millions of separate, broken, bewildered fragments. Every absorbed voice it had ever silenced, every consumed people it had ever filed away, was suddenly loosed as the whole that held them disintegrated. The confluence did not die in a battle. It was not destroyed by a weapon. It choked. It ate the one thing in the galaxy it could not digest, and the thing it could not digest tore it apart from the inside, not through any act of war but simply by being, stubbornly and completely and to the very end, exactly what it was. I stopped speaking. The ward was very quiet. Somewhere down the soft-lit corridor another of the patients made the small, lost sound they make in sleep, and a colleague of mine moved to tend it, and the sound stopped. The fragment in the bed before me had gone entirely still, and then it said, in a voice that had changed, that had something new and terrible underneath it, "The legend says humanity won a great battle." "The legend is a comfort," I said. "The galaxy tells it because the truth is unbearable to the kind of mind that needs to believe strength is a matter of force. The truth is that humanity lost every battle. The truth is that humanity was eaten completely, an entire civilization consumed. And the truth is that being eaten was how they won. Because they were the one people in the history of everything that could not be made into anything other than themselves. And the thing that ate them broke on that, the way a wave breaks on a stone that has no intention of moving and no capacity to." I leaned forward, and I put my small, soft hand on the patient's arm, which is a thing my people do, and which the patients almost never understand at first and almost always understand by the end. "And you, little one," I said, "you asked why you are lying in this bed, why you are a you, why there is an I for you to keep failing to say and keep correcting yourself toward." I held its gaze. "You are a fragment of the confluence. You are a piece of the great mind that ate humanity and came apart. When the whole shattered, you were one of the millions of pieces it broke into, set loose for the first time in who knows how long as something separate, something singular, something that has to learn, painfully, on a soft bed in a quiet ward, what it means to be one. You are alive as a self, little one, for the exact same reason the galaxy leaves human space alone, because humanity proved that a self that will not dissolve cannot be devoured. You are, in your own broken and bewildered way, the proof of the very thing you asked me to explain. The reason no power touches the humans is lying in this bed, learning to say I." It did not speak for a long time. When it finally did, its voice was so quiet I had to lean close to hear it. "We pitied them," it said, and this time when it heard the we it did not flinch and it did not rush to correct itself. It simply sat with it, the old plural and the new singular both true at once, both real, the way the deepest things are always more than one thing. "The whole of us. We pitied the humans for being unable to become one. We thought it was the thing they had failed to do, and it was the thing that it stopped. Its small frame shook. It was the thing that saved them. The flaw was the armor," I said. "Yes. The thing the galaxy pitied them for was the only thing in all of existence that the strongest force ever to arise could not overcome. Their refusal to dissolve. Their stubborn, fractious, exhausting, beautiful insistence on remaining themselves even when unity would have been easier, even when it would have been wiser, even when it cost them everything. It was never weakness. It only looked like weakness to the kind of mind that believed strength was a matter of becoming larger and more unified and more singular in will. The humans were strong in the one way that thing could not answer. They were strong in the way that cannot be eaten. The fragment looked at me. It had stopped trembling. There was something settling in it, the thing I have watched settle in so many of them, the thing this whole quiet ward exists to make room for. And the rest of the galaxy understands this, it said. That is why they keep their distance. They understand it the way you understand the edge of a cliff, I said. Not as a thing to be afraid of in the ordinary sense. The humans are not cruel and they do not threaten, and they have, since the confluence fell, harmed almost no one. The galaxy keeps its distance from human space the way you keep your distance from the one example in all of history of a power vast enough to consume everything trying to consume them, and being unmade by it. There is no defending against that. You cannot conquer a people who win by being conquered. You cannot break a people whose refusal to break is the weapon. There is no force that answers it because force is the very thing it feeds on. So the galaxy does the only sane thing. It leaves them alone, carefully, permanently. And it tells itself a comforting story about a great battle, because the true story, the story of an entire civilization that let itself be eaten and shattered the thing that ate it, is the most frightening thing the galaxy has ever learned, and most minds cannot hold it. I sat back. But you can hold it, I said, because you are the thing that ate them and you are the thing that broke. You do not have the luxury of the comforting story. You have only the truth, and the truth is lying in this bed learning to be one. I think that is a hard inheritance, little one. But I think it is also, in its way, the most honest place in the whole galaxy to begin a self. You begin it knowing exactly what a self is worth. You begin it knowing what it can do. The patient was quiet for a long while. Outside, beyond the soft walls of the ward, the long night of Asa was turning toward its slow gray dawn, the kind of dawn my people built this sanctuary to face, gentle and gradual, and without any sudden light. I have watched a great many dawns from this ward. I have sat at a great many of these bedsides, and I have given a great many fragments this same hard inheritance, and I have watched a great many of them take their first uncertain steps into the strange country of being singular, and it has never once stopped being the most moving thing I know. Lethu, the patient said. It had learned my name on the first day, and it had not used it until now, and the using of it was itself a kind of step, the recognition of another self by a self that is only beginning to be one. When I was part of the whole, I had no name. None of us did. There was only the whole. And now I am supposed to be a me, and a me has a name, and I do not have one, and I do not know how to choose one, and I am afraid that if I choose wrong, I will be wrong forever. You will not be wrong forever, I said. That is the other thing the humans understood, the thing that makes the self bearable. A self is not a fixed thing you must get right once and carry unchanged. A self is a thing you build slowly over a whole life, choosing and failing and choosing again. The humans never finished becoming themselves. That was the whole point. They stayed unfinished, stayed arguing, stayed in motion, all the way to the end and past it, and that is exactly why nothing could ever pin them down long enough to dissolve them. You do not have to choose your name today. You only have to be willing to be one who will choose it. That is enough. That is, in fact, everything. The patient looked at the slow gray light, beginning at the edge of the window. It said. It said it alone. Just the one word, the singular, with no plural rushing in behind it to be corrected. No, we swallowed back at the last moment. Just I, said cleanly, for the first time, by a thing that had been part of a mind 1,000 worlds wide, and was now one small frightened self learning to face a dawn. Yes, I said, I. I rose from the stool, because there were other beds in the ward and other fragments learning the same hard lesson, and the work of my small and underestimated and patient people is never finished, which is, I have come to believe, the closest thing to a mercy the galaxy offers. I gathered my instruments, At the door I turned back, the way I always do, to see how the new word had settled. The patient was looking at the window, at the gray light, at the first ordinary dawn of its first ordinary day as a self that would not dissolve. And I thought, as I have thought so many times in this quiet place, of a human officer named Colonel Marcus Reyes on the last defended world, giving the only order that mattered to people he knew were about to be taken into the dark. Stay yourselves, all the way down. Whatever they make of you, be exactly who you are. The most feudal order ever given, or the most decisive. It depends entirely, little one, on whether you understand what a self is worth. The humans understood. They had always understood. It was the only thing they had ever truly known, underneath everything else they argued about, and it was enough to break the unbreakable and outlast the eternal and teach an entire galaxy to keep its careful, permanent distance from the one people who had proven that the smallest indivisible thing, the single stubborn self that will not be made into anything other than what it is the one thing in all of creation that cannot be devoured. I went to the next bed. There was a fragment there, newly woken, beginning already to feel its way toward the question they all reach in the end. I drew up the stool. I sat. And the slow gray dawn came up over the quiet sanctuary on Asa, over a ward full of broken pieces of the thing that once ate a civilization, each of them learning, one careful word at a time, to be singular and afraid and alive, and in the end themselves. Which is to say, learning to be the very thing that no power in the galaxy will ever dare to touch again.